It's back, ladies and gentlemen. It is back. It's well and truly back, and you've been getting involved. If you want to, hashtag Ask the Handicapper. All sorts of conundrums being posed for the chief, who's right here. It is, of course, the BHA Supremo, Phil Smith. You basically are. I mean, for those who don't know, maybe there will be people watching this for the first time. You say something, the other handicappers listen, and if you don't like what the other handicappers are doing, you simply handicap their nation yourself.
I wish it was as simple as that.
Well, isn't it? Let's take Ireland for an example. You didn't like what they were doing, and so you said, OK, it's fine. You carry on handicapping your horses, but I'll handicap them as well.
Well, that's the same in any country you ever go to. The handicapper who does the Melbourne Cup, he makes his own mind up because it's his handicap.
So do you handicap all of the Australian horses?
Well, if they were to come here and handicap.
No,
yes.
but in general.
Well, we assess.
Because you handicap all the Irish horses, whether they come here or not, don't you?
I don't actually assess any of the Australian horses at all, but one of my colleagues does. So all of the Australian pattern races will put a figure on our international system, but it's not actually me that does that. You
weren't convinced by your colleagues in Ireland, though, were you? When you go to that international conference each year, do you sit there and pray you don't get drawn by the Irish handicapper?
Gary O'Gorman is one of my best friends in racing, and I enjoy sitting next to him, and we generally agree on most things.
It's funny you say that, Phil, because we've got Gary on the line now. He's going to talk about how you've No, he's not. Right, so we've got lots to talk about. Willie Twiston-Davis has already on about countermeasure. It's great when the jockeys and trainers get involved as well. We'll get on to countermeasure in a moment, because on July the 19th, Twitter went crazy about handicapping. This was the kind of thing that was written. Where shall we go? Well, Jason Haythorne, or I think we'll go with Haythorne. I'm not absolutely sure how I say his name. We'll go with Jason. He says handicapping of 2 of his horses this year, symptomatic of a problem. Not just a difficulty, Phil, a problem in your handicapping system, according to Jason. Okay. He says it's symptomatic of a problem in how handicapping is implemented by the BHA. So let's start with his gripe. And let's see whether Jason is a hero and destroys you, or whether you wiggle out of this once again like a very slimy worm. Iftarak, up £5 for 4th place in a handicap. This was a market raisin handicap. Handicap policy - poor owner experience, more important than prize money in attracting / retaining owners. Iftarak, up £5. James Knight, who works for Coral, is an established form expert. Responds, that's incredibly harsh. £1 or maybe £2 rise was the expectation. And it goes on, lengthy conversations about the severe handicapping of the BHA, of which you are in charge of, Phil. Okay. So Jason's question is, Iftarak up £5. Is that harsh, as Jason says, or is it lenient or fair?
OK, let's look at the look at the horses going into this race. It's traditionally quite a strong summer jumping race, but obviously it varies a little bit from year to year. So let's look at the form of the horses going in. The winner had won all 4 of his previous races. The second horse had won 3 runs ago. The third had won 3 of his last 4 runs. Iftarak had won 4 runs ago. The 5th horse had won all 4 of his previous runs. The 6th horse had won 2 of his previous 4 runs. The 7th horse had won 2 of his last 5 runs. The 8th horse had won all 4 of his previous runs. The 9th horse had won both of his previous 2 starts. The 10th horse had won 4 runs ago, and the 11th horse had won 3 of his 4 previous runs. You very, very rarely get a race like that where horses are coming into it in such amazing form. And so then what happens as a result? So we're already thinking this looks a pretty decent race. And the first 4 come a little way clear of the rest of the field. So the question is, what do we do with them? And the decision was made that the 4th horse and the 3rd horse, who've come clear of the 5th, should go up £5. The 2nd horse should go up 6, and the winner went up 8. Now, I don't think anybody is complaining about the winner going up £8 for winning a decent prize. But the interesting thing is that the fourth horse, Iftirak, he's only 2 lengths behind. So if he were to run against the winner again next time, he's going to be £3 better for 2 lengths. Now, I don't think many people would be unhappy with that. It just happens to have been a strong race. So that was before the race, that was in the race. What happens after the race? Well, at the moment, nothing from that race has subsequently run. Now, it may well be that the winner, the second, the third and the fifth all come out and get absolutely stuffed next time, in which case we'd lower the level of the race. We've spoken about it on the programme before.
This is where people disagree with you, Phil. They don't believe you do that.
We've spoken about it before, and I've given you figures that you've authenticated about.
As we know, figures can be made
collateral changes. And so if the first, second, third, fifth, sixth, whatever, come out and they'll get stuffed and it shows that the race was less good than we thought, then Iftirak will drop collaterally. That's common handicap.
But if Jason was here, Phil, he might say to you this. He might. I don't know. He may just say, you know what, Phil, you've made your case.
Yep.
Good case. But he might say to you, Iftirak was tailed off a mark of 124 at Huntingdon in January, to which you'll respond, oh, that was soft ground, because you'd have to come up with something.
No, I'd respond that it's nothing to do with his handicap mark.
OK, well, I'm talking about handicap marks, so let's just go with the handicap mark system for the moment.
OK.
He couldn't win off 124, yeah? Tailed off. So he was dropped £2, so it was to do with a handicap mark, because he was dropped £2 to 122 at Warwick on the 18th of May, where the ground was very similar to Market Raisin. And he was tailed off again. He couldn't win off 122. Amazingly, despite being beaten 20 lengths at Warwick, there was no drop for that, despite the fact you say you dropped them when they run badly. He was tailed off. He wasn't dropped a single pound at Market Raspberry. At Market Raspberry, he couldn't win off 122. He could only finish fourth on what we could all argue was a career best performance, but he still couldn't win. So how do you now expect him to win off 127 when he's already proven he cannot win off 124 or 122?
Well, he hasn't proved in those occasions. So what you're saying is this horse can... Are you actually giving us a guarantee that this horse will never win?
Phil.
No, I want a guarantee from you.
We're dealing with horse and flesh here. Who can guarantee anything?
You're basically saying that this horse will never win off 127. That's what you're saying. Just because it hasn't won off 122 or 124 does not mean that it can't win off 127.
You put words in my mouth there,
let me
Phil.
come
if
back.
That was a BHA meeting. They'd be saying, well, hold on, Phil, no one said what you just said.
And let me come back and look at the horse's form, right? It's heavy ground at Leicester. It's soft, heavy in places at Huntingdon. It's good to soft at Warwick. And then it runs on good ground at Market Raisin, and it runs perfectly well. Where's the problem in that? It's run on a couple of occasions on very testing ground. It has run well on good to soft in the past, but it hasn't run well on heavy ground in the past. But here's a race that it's clearly run a career best. It's a listed handicap.
Mike Spence.
It's a career best.
We'll move on because we're getting your general gist. Mike Spence, the son of Alan Spence, the man who is as big as Abramovich at Chelsea. Okay. So consider your future if you ever want to go to Chelsea. Says handicapping has become so lazy.
Oh, okay.
He looks at you, Phil, Mike Spence, and he just sees a lazy chief. He says handicapping has become so lazy in recent times. Horse of mine dropped £1. £1, solitary pound, although he doesn't give it his name, so we can't carry on with this conversation too far. £1 to 76, having been beaten 14 lengths. You dropped a horse a pound for 14 lengths.
Well, it almost certainly will have been because of its previous form. We're not just assessing horses automatically on their most recent moderate run. We're looking at the overall profile of a horse. We absolutely cannot. If a horse finishes beaten 60 lengths after winning, why would we be dropping that horse? We're responsible not just for the handicap marks, but we're actually responsible for the integrity of British racing. And if everybody knew that you could win a race and then get beaten a million miles and get dropped, then what would people be doing?
Mike carries on.
What was the answer to that question?
Mike carries on.
No answer to that question.
I've got a lot of tweets to get to. Mike carries on. Just think the handicapper is far too quick to raise horses for not winning. This is the thing is,
Well,
horses are struggling to win, they're consistent, and you continually put them up and deny them their chance.
Okay, if I'm owning or training Iftarak, right, he's now on 127.
Well, he's on the mark, he's going to struggle, yeah.
Right, I'll be running that horse in a 0 to 130 next time, and I think it's got every chance of winning.
But that's
So there's a bit of help, a bit of advice. Let's see what happens.
well, as if they hadn't thought about that.
Well, let's see what happens when they do it.
It's terrific advice, but the answer, of course, is not so much will it win next time, it's how much you'll drop it when it's tailed off again. Will you put it straight back to 1-2-2?
We absolutely will not. And again, I go back to...
What chance has Iftarak got?
Well, it will not be
He's a
dropped.
horse who's become a pointless horse.
If this horse is tailed off next time, is that £5 rise the difference between running 4th beaten 2 lengths in a listed handicap at Market Raisin and being tailed off somewhere else? That's not the cause of its poor run. It's some other factor that we're not involved in. Just going to remember, everybody makes a big issue of its weight. But actually, weight is just one factor of a whole host of things which go into making a horse run well or badly. Trip, ground, health, well-being, pace of the race, etc., etc. So I think that if Iftarak runs in a 0 to 130, let's take that challenge on. Let's run him in a 0 to 130 and let's see what happens.
So your final answer to Jason is actually he should be patting you on the back, sending you a Christmas present and saying, thank you, Phil, for raising my horse, just £5.
No, what he should be doing is thinking, actually, my horse has run a really, really good race, and that's positive. I'd much rather my horse was going up in the weights than coming down. You get far more success from horses going up than after a horse is starting to drop, for obvious reasons. So here's a horse that's fit, it's in form, it's run well in a really hot race. I think we've proven that it was a hot race. So strike while the iron's hot. Find a 0 to 130. Let's see what happens. And if it's beaten 2 or 3 lengths, 4 lengths, then maybe we would be dropping it. Maybe we overreacted a bit. If it's beaten 60 lengths, I'll guarantee it won't be dropped, but it'll probably win.
Phil, you're not allowed to bet, but let's just...
But you can, Matt, and you'll be back in Iftarak when it runs in a 0 to 130.
I wouldn't touch Iftarak with a barge after you've destroyed his handicap rating. You aren't allowed to bet, but you can consider the scenario of a normal person.
Yes.
Countermeasure.
And that'll be favourite in a 0 to 130.
Countermeasure turns up in the Cambridgeshire off a mark of 112, having been beaten the last time it ran in a handicap off a mark of 79. Would you back Countermeasure in the Cambridgeshire off 112?
Probably not, because I'm not sure that the race would be run to suit him.
I mean,
that's another
such a
factor.
worm-like, sneaky way of getting at it. It's like saying, but I don't know whether the ground will be bottomless.
Well, I don't.
The fact of the matter is, you and I both know Countermeasure cannot win any handicap off a mark of 112.
Well, he may not be able to win a handicap off 112, but that's what he's achieved in his races.
Has he?
Has
he, though? Has he achieved
Can
that?
Postponed win off a mark of 124 if he was running in a handicap? Possibly not.
You see, Phil, what handicappers
Because
seem to be...
Because as soon as we get above 110, right, we're not talking about horses running in handicaps, are we? We're talking about that's what they've achieved as their best performance. Anything above 110, it's not necessarily going to run in a handicap, and most of these horses won't. If Countermeasure's in 112, you know, he'll be running in Group 2s, Group 3s, or as a pacemaker for other horses in the yard. But Countermeasure's rating of 112, he can win a Group 3.
But you see, the problem is you've got here...
You asked me about winning, he can win a Group 3.
Well, time can only tell.
He's rated £1 less than Bullet Train, right? Another pacemaker of 3 or 4 years ago. And I think Countermeasure is just as good a horse as Bullet Train.
But the problem you've got here is actually Iftarak feels very nicely into the Countermeasure conversation. Because why are you scrunging up your face, Chief?
I'm struggling to see the link between Countermeasure and Iftarak, but go on.
Well, exactly. This is your problem. You do not listen.
I'm listening. I just pulled a face.
No, you interrupted with a face. So, Iftarak led, run of the race, easy. Up front, no horses banging into it, ping, 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 obviously runs above itself. Countermeasure has had uncontested easy leads, of course, in the Eclipse and at York, and has gradually faded away because he doesn't have the ability. And the other horses don't want to catch it either, because they want that leader to stay there. So they're quite happy to let a substandard horse keep going to give them a lead as long as possible. And yet you take the form literally.
Well, if you remember the first time we came in and we discussed countermeasure, we said that we got countermeasure performing to 114, but we'd actually moved him to 110. And of course, that's a key point linked with what I've just said, because 110 meant he can run in a handicap, right? So at that point, he could have performed in a handicap. Now then, let's go back to countermeasure. The next time he runs, we think he performed to 112. So straight away, we think, well, maybe that 114 wasn't such a one-off. Maybe it wasn't a fluke. Maybe he wasn't flattered, because he's done it again, a second time. He's now performed to 112. So we actually thought to ourselves, well, actually, the horse has done it twice now. We were a bit sceptical the first time, not as sceptical as you, but certainly a bit sceptical, which is why we didn't go the whole way to 114. Second time, he performs to 112. Well, hang on, he's done it twice now. The horse is 112. And I'd rather have that horse on 112, let's see him go in running in a Group 3 on his own merits, let's see him running as a pacemaker. What I don't want to see is him running in a handicap off 80, because I'd fear for all the other owners and trainers off a horse off 80. And if you remember last time I was in here, you said he should have stayed on 80. Now, do you think he should have stayed on 80 now, and now he's done it twice?
I can't remember saying that specific figure. I think he should be on a mark somewhere between 85 and 95.
Okay, right.
I presume the handicapping job at the VHA is not going to be coming my way?
We haven't a vacancy at present.
No.
But we'll keep you in mind.
OK, because I don't believe Time Test ran to 121. I don't believe Air Pilot ran to 113 because he needs soft ground. And Marsoub has completely gone at the game. And whether Mondialiste is really worth 115, only time will tell. So for me, the whole race is obliterated as a handicap race.
Well, so every time countermeasure runs, you just forget it as a contest. I mean, that's pretty convenient, but not the convenience that we have. We have to assess every race that's run in Britain, and most of the races that run around the world as well. So we have to come up with a decision. And it's easy for you to sit here and say, well, I don't fancy that race, so I think I'll just forget about it. We can't do that. We have to make a decision. And we owe it to all of the other owners and trainers to not to gift countermeasure a handicap. And if we'd have left that on 80, which is what you said last time, we wouldn't have been doing our job. But let's just go back to Air Pilot, all right? Because he's the interesting horse.
What, the soft ground lover?
He's the interesting horse in the race, and we totally agree with you. He didn't run his race in that race.
So having dissed me for dissing the race, you're now dissing the race.
No.
Right.
We agree with you. He didn't do his race. We think he is unsuited by the ground. So we've got him running £3 below his rating. So we've kept him on 113. Now, he's finished behind countermeasure, who's on 112. So in a mythical handicap, Air Pilot would have to give countermeasure £1 from that race. So we sort of half agree with you, but we can't agree that we just ignore it, because we're not allowed to just ignore races.
What's the highest rating maiden there's ever been? Is countermeasure bang up there with the highest?
He'd be pretty close to it, I would think.
It's a good question, isn't it?
It's a very good question. I think you're almost certainly right. I mean, if they wanted to run him in a maiden, he'd scare everyone else off, wouldn't he?
But he might not win it. Willie Twiston Davis is on your side. But he would be, because he's a Roger Charlton groupie. But
he's also a pretty shrewd form expert.
He is very, very clever, and he's a very, very good young rider, actually. But all that apart, we don't want to make his ego too big. It's big enough. He says, I really believe countermeasure can run to 112 consistently, provided I'm on... Oh, no, he didn't. I added that in. That was license. He didn't put provided I'm on it. He then absolutely slates Andrea Rezzini. No, he doesn't do that either. But what he does say is he put a line through the Kempton form where he was second. He says slow pace over a trip short of his best. Mm-hmm. There is a possibility that is true, what he's saying, isn't it?
Well, you mentioned an interesting point before about front runners, and you said that Istarak was flattered because he was a front runner, and you said that countermeasure is flattered because he's a front runner. You know, I'm not sure that's the case. I often put on our system that the reason why a front runner runs disappointingly is because they've actually gone too fast in front. So I think you've got to look really carefully at front runners, and sometimes, yes, they do get an uncontested lead and they may well be flattered. Sometimes they end up running where they should run, and sometimes they end up running considerably worse than where they run. But isn't that any different from hold-up horses? No different at all. It's the way the race is run is the absolute key.
Brilliant tweet just come in from the Kublers, by the way, who are very clever people, I hasten to add. Intelligent, highly educated, with a question that I've never even considered in my life. And you know what? Sometimes, just sometimes, I have to hold my hands up with this show. We have to tell the truth. Sometimes, if there's a question that I think is unfairly tricky, I warn Phil during the break and just say, look, you better have a think about this because this is tricky stuff. This question I am not going to warn you about, Phil, because you've irritated me,
Fire away.
to be frank. I think you've got Iftirat wrong. You've clearly got countermeasure wrong. So you've annoyed me. And just to confirm, incidentally, with countermeasure, remember it's rated 112 and Phil would not back it in a handicap off the rating he has given that horse, effectively saying the horse would not win a handicap off 112. Before you come back, Phil, under the rules about the races, we actually do have to take a break now.